Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. Today I am going to be doing the announcement of the winner of the giveaway, which I actually haven't done yet because I'm going to compile it all into a random generator when I'm finished recording this, and also answer the questions that everybody sent to me. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who left a question. I really appreciate that, and to everybody who joined the giveaway. I am so very appreciative that all of you have decided to devote your time to watching this channel. I know that there are so many things that are out there to watch and so many different ways to spend your time. So the fact that you have chosen to devote some of that time to me and to the content that I create makes me really grateful, and I really appreciate it. So the first question comes from Patrick, and that is, what are your favorite mythologies? And though I really enjoy reading about mythology, the only two grand kind of mythologies that I have really spent any time exploring would be Norse mythology and Greek mythology. And just because I have a lot more experience with the Greek mythology, I feel like I understand the stories a lot more. I understand the historical context around them a lot more. I know more about the characters and the intimate details of the mythology. That has to be the answer, but I am always open to exploring more. I am really looking forward to diving a little deeper into Norse mythology, especially with how much I enjoyed The Shadow of the Gods, and then of course exploring some of the other varied mythologies. I got some great recommendations from people when I posed that question in an earlier video, so I have some books that I am definitely wanting to check out in that way. The next question comes from Morgan, and that question is, which book would you want to be able to read again for the very first time? This is a topic that I have thought about a lot. Back when I used to write a fair bit, or like try to write a fair bit, I had thought about this as the context for a short story, because I think there's a lot that goes into your experience of a book for the first time, where you are in life, how that book impacts you. And I would be really scared to go back and read a book that I loved for the first time, not being in that stage or that phase of life, because it could be a totally different experience. So I think if I was going to reread something again, it would be something from the last year or the last little while. And given how much I have loved John Gwynne's books in recent months, I think I would just like to go back and reread probably A Time of Courage, the final book of the Banished Lands saga, book 7 in the Banished Lands, because that book ripped a hole in my heart, and I love it when that happens, and it would be so fun to go back and experience that all over again for the first time. The next question is from Miss Archaeologist, and it says, which book was your fastest read? Also, is there a fantasy author whom you've discovered as a child and continue to enjoy their works today or on a regular basis? I have very strange reading habits, so I tend to either only read a sprinkling of pages, like 2 or 3 pages between finishing work for the day and making supper, or a couple of pages before reading the kids their story at night, or I will read an entire book all at once. I am not someone who's very disciplined and sits down and says, okay, I'm going to read my 100 pages a day, and it's going to be, I'm going to do that. Usually I will read a book and then go a couple of days without reading much of anything at all, and then read another book all at once, like in big chunks. So I don't know that there has been a book that I could say I read the fastest, because I tend to binge books really quickly. As for an author who had a big impact on me as a child that I continue to read today, J.R.R. Tolkien had a huge influence on me as a child. His books are really what solidified my love of fantasy, and I continue to really enjoy his work today, but obviously he is not publishing anything else. I know we get books that are comprised of kind of more detailed versions of things that come from the Silmarillion or from other books that he has published, most of which have been expanded upon or edited by his son. But other than that, I think I started reading Stephen King fairly young in life, and I still really love his books, and he's got a big backlog of books that I haven't read all the way through. So maybe he would be an author that I definitely started to love as a younger child and still continue to really enjoy his books today. The next question is from Amora, and it says, if you could bring a character out of a book into our world, who would you bring and why? And this will always be an animal companion character. I want to leave the characters where they are in their stories with the people that they have relationships with, but I would love to bring some of my favorite animal companions into the world. And I would love to say someone like Storm from The Faithful and the Fallen, but again, she has someone that she's really attached to, and I don't want to take her out of that story. So I'm going to say it would be really cool to have one of the talking birds from The Faithful and the Fallen, an unnamed bird that I can bond with for myself and can stay with me and guide me and help me in my day-to-day life. But I have always wanted to have a bird animal companion ever since I read a book that had one in it when I was a little kid. And so I would love to have one of those animal companions come out and spend time with me. The next question is from Jitesh, and the question is, which fantasy world would you like to visit given safety precautions? So obviously if you could go there and not be completely run down by a dark lord or skewered by magic or any of those things, where would you go? And this is a really boring answer because I'm sure it's the same for so many people who love fantasy, but I would just like to go to the Shire. I feel like I would fit in well with hobbits. I too enjoy spending time outside and relaxing, maybe reading a book, maybe working on a memoir, eating a lot of different forms of breakfast and just snacks throughout the day. That is a lifestyle that I can really get behind, and one that I actually try to emulate right now, but the setting of the Shire definitely is a step up from the environment or the climate of Newfoundland where I live. I would love to have those green rolling hills, the trees. There's another whole world out there for you to explore, but only if you feel up to it. I just think that Hobbit society is kind of the pinnacle. It is what I am striving for, that kind of relaxed lifestyle, which goes against some of my underlying neuroses, I think, but it's kind of the dream, is to be able to attain that level of relaxation. So I would, in very boring fashion, just like to go to the Shire. The next question is from Jasmine, and it says, which book reminds you of growing up or your childhood? And this would definitely be Watership Down by Richard Adams. Watership Down has long been one of my favorite books of all time. I read it for the first time, I have to say, I think I was maybe about 7 or 8 when I read Watership Down for the first time. And it reminds me of childhood for a number of reasons. So it was one of the first adult books that I had read on my own. I remember loving it. It introduced me to some layers of fantasy that I hadn't experienced before, like the idea of a mythology within the world, the idea of creating your own language within a world. And I just really loved those characters. But it reminds me of childhood because I read it when I was at an age that I was still really into playing pretend and imaginative play. And I just remember that I had read it and my best friend had not, but I told her about it. And so then we would spend hours at home playing Watership Down, and we would build these huge, complicated forts in my basement, and those would be our warrens, and we would kind of burrow through them, and we would spend time in them, and it gives me those nostalgic feelings of being a kid, because not only did I read it and love it, but I used to play Watership Down all the time. And then of course I watched the movie, which was a bit traumatizing because it is kind of a scary movie, but I loved the movie as well. And I feel like it just took up a lot of real estate in my childhood. Watership Down permeated more parts of my life than just the reading part. And it gives me a lot of those really warm and fuzzy childhood type feelings. So that is definitely my answer for that question. The next is a double set of questions from Igor, and the first question is, from your perspective as a medical professional, do you have any favorite depictions of medicine and doctors in fantasy? So probably if I had a long time to think about this and kind of go back and catalog the different books that I have read, I could find some that really made an impression. But I will say, The first book that I remember reading that made that impression on me was definitely The Name of the Wind, because I read it when I was in medical school. And I remember reading about the characters in the story who were in that kind of medicine stream at university, and thinking that it was really cool that that was integrated into fantasy works. A lot of what you get in fantasy is obviously your kind of complementary and alternative medicine. So you get the herbs and you get the plants and the different things that are used to cure different ailments. And what I do really like is when I see these being used in ways that I have learned about. So there are certain plants that have either anti-inflammatory properties or antidepressant properties. And we learn about these because we learn a lot about complementary and alternative medicine in medical school now, because so many patients are interested in that. You need to be well versed and you need to understand and have an open mind. And so whenever I see that kind of stuff pop up in books and it's used appropriately, then I love that. I really like when that happens. Unfortunately, I don't have a lot of specific examples, but I will keep an eye out for that as I read through, and maybe come back to it and talk about it a little bit in a video, because I think that is a really cool question and a really cool topic to be explored. The second question that he asked was, what do you tend to enjoy more, a book written in a straightforward, transparent language, or a more challenging and quirky style? I definitely like books that are written in a more challenging and quirky style. I like it when authors do strange things in terms of the structure of their novels. I've read a couple, and these are not fantasy, but a couple of books I really enjoyed like that were Trust Exercise, which I read last year, which takes the idea of trauma and describes or writes the book in a way that is very reminiscent of the way that people experience and remember trauma. So that was a really fascinating book. I really liked the book Fates and Furies, which is written from the perspective of two people within a marriage, the husband's and the wife's perspective, and you see how the feelings within a marriage overlap, the way that people, even people who are so closely tied together, can misunderstand or not understand the person that they have chosen to spend their lives with. And that was really fascinating as well. So I really enjoy that when authors play a little bit with structure. I love quirky or flowery language, as long as it doesn't pass my own personal threshold for over the top. I really loved This Is How You Lose the Time War when I read it last year. That had a very stylized writing approach, and I just love deep and difficult writing. Obviously, I do like to read kind of straightforward, plot-driven books in between some of those heavier reads, but I think I am someone who does notice when the writing falls a little flat, and that can take me out of the story sometimes. And I think that's why I've had some difficulty connecting with some authors who are really well known and really well loved. But it's not an instant miss for me. It's just that I do prefer that kind of beautiful or quirky writing style for sure. The next question is from Jean or Jean, I'm not sure, so I apologize, but it says, what is the first book that really got you into the fantasy genre and why? So my first fantasy loves were Jack London's books, White Fang and The Call of the Wild, which are from the perspective of animals, so I guess they're only fantasy in the sense that we get the story told from an animal's perspective, but that is fantastic. So I think those were a couple of the books that really, really brought me into loving fantasy. And obviously, as with so many people who love fantasy, The Hobbit. My dad read me The Hobbit when I was 5. It made it had a huge impact on me, and it's really fun because I'm reading The Hobbit with my kids right now, and they have some of these same opinions. So I remember asking a lot of questions because I could see the book getting shorter and shorter and being like, but what are we going to do next? Like, there's more books, right? And he would say, yes, there's The Lord of the Rings, and you can read that when you're a little bit older. And I'd say, well, it's going to follow Bilbo, right? And he's like, well, Bilbo's in the book, but it doesn't really follow Bilbo. And I was heartbroken. And my daughter is having the exact same reaction right now. She's like, I don't know know why you would write a story about anybody but Bilbo. And I'm like, I know, I feel it, but you will love this one too when you're ready for it. So it's really fun to watch her having the same reactions that I had. My son is also enjoying The Hobbit, but he is not as passionate about it at this point. He just really likes the songs and has taken to calling me Old Tom Naughty now whenever he is upset with me. So that's his update from The Hobbit. But yes, The Hobbit, definitely huge impact on me as a fantasy lover. This next question is from Victoria, and it says, if you could combine your favorite characters and favorite world from different genres, which would they be? This is a really good question, and probably the kind of question that is not good to answer on the fly. My favorite fantasy world, as I said before, is the world is Middle Earth from the Lord of the Rings. Favorite characters that I have in non-fantasy genres. There is a book that I really love that's a middle grade book that's called The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian, and it's the author Sherman Alexie. It's based on his experiences growing up on a reservation and then leaving the reservation to kind of seek an education that would benefit him greatly moving forward in his life. And the character in that novel is a character that is really easy to fall in love with and who's had a very difficult life and has lived in a very difficult world. So if I could take some of those safety precautions that were offered in a previous question and put that character into kind of a fun and beautiful fantasy world. This is also a character who really loves to read and loves books. If I could transplant him into either the Shire or maybe the wizarding world of Harry Potter, somewhere magical and whimsical without any fear of danger, then I would really like that. The next set of questions are from Klaus, and he asks, number 1, who should have ended up sitting on the Iron Throne? And I'm going to say that at this point in my journey with the Game of Thrones, I don't care. I would melt down the Iron Throne if I could possibly. I may reach a point in my life when I once again care who ends up on the Iron Throne, and that will be when, or I suppose if, George R.R. Martin ever decides to finish the book series. I have removed it from my mind, as it were. I will go back and start over from the beginning, like I said, if we get a publication for the final book, and then I will come back to that question, even if it's in 25 years from now, and I will answer it with a well thought out answer. But right now, my level of not caring for what happens in the Game of Thrones is such that I cannot give this a good answer. So I'm sorry, Klaus, that's probably not what you were looking for. But let's see if I can give you a better response to the second question, which is, what is the prettiest book you own? So I think the prettiest versions of books that I own are either these versions of Spinning Silver and Uprooted that my husband got for me for Christmas, or the Minalima children's classics, which I'll just pop a picture of one of them up in the video. I think those are probably the prettiest books that I own. I really like the illustrations in the Farseer, in the illustrated Farseer, but the covers are nice, but I wouldn't say like they're the prettiest covers in the world, though I do really like those editions. The next question is from Roy, and it says, if you could have one magical power from the books you've read, what would it be? This is going to be the lamest answer ever. My husband always makes fun of me because we talk about this, like, if you could have a superpower, what would you want? And I would just like to have the power of Allspeak that Thor gets in the Marvel comics, where he can instantly recognize or speak whatever language he needs to when he comes in contact with people. Learning languages has always been something that I have really loved. Before I went into medical school, my undergraduate is actually in French language and literature. And I did a little bit of linguistics amongst that as well, but I would love to have time to devote to learning more languages, I like to communicate. I like to talk to people, and being able to speak any language that I wanted at the drop of a hat whenever I needed to would not only be really useful, but I just think it would be so enjoyable. You could travel wherever you wanted. You could really understand a place and the people who live there. So I know that that is not a very cool or flashy power. My husband, if you would ever want to know the answer, is that he would like to have Magneto's powers to manipulate metal. He has told me this 1,000 times. So if you prefer that cooler answer, then you can go with that one. But I will stick with my very nerdy answer. Also, just imagine like the original books that you could read. So good. Oh, I would love it. That is my ultimate superpower, magical power, whatever kind of power you want to call it. The next question is from Death by Chai, and that question is, what is your favorite physical book on your bookshelf? My favorite physical book is not actually on my bookshelf. It's up in my closet because I keep it wrapped in bubble wrap, but I need to take it out. And it's really funny because it is my favorite physical book because it means a lot to me, but it is actually a book that is my least favorite of the series that it belongs in, and that is book 6 of The Dark Tower. So my copy is just up here. The Song of Susanna, but I have a copy of the Song of Susanna that's actually personalized and signed by Stephen King. So that means a lot to me. It has traveled with me. I have refused to put it into storage or anywhere else where it could get musty or mildewy or anything else. But now that I have these bookshelves set up, I probably should just take it out and display it or put it somewhere like in a cabinet or on a shelf or something. But it is difficult to get things signed by Mr. King, so I am really thankful to have this book, and it means a lot to me for sure, and that makes it my favorite book on my shelf, or my favorite book in my possession, despite the fact that The Song of Susanna is sadly my least favorite book in the Dark Tower series. The next question is from Grim Wright, and it says, what is a book you have reread the most and why? So another reading fact about me is that I love rereading books, and I used to have, I'm going to call it a problem. It's not a problem. Whatever you want to read is fine, and if you're someone who gets comfort out of rereading, then that's great. Totally, I identify with that. I am there with you. But I've been very intentional over the last 5 years about trying to limit the amount of books that I reread, because it used to be about 50-50. I would read almost the same amount of books would be rereads as new reads, and there's just so many fantastic books out there that I want to read more of them, and I want to discover more of them, so I find myself rereading less. But I'm always tempted to do so. And I keep a record, at least over the last 12 years, I've kept a record of every book that I read in physical form. So I just have a notebook that I write them in. So I know for a fact that over the past 10 years, the book that I have reread the most is The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. I have read it almost once a year. There was 1 year since I first read it that I did not read it that year, but I read it twice the first year that I read it. So I have read it every year since 2012, I think is when it came out. So I have read that book many times, but the books that I have reread the most in my life are probably either The Lord of the Rings. So I read The Lord of the Rings for the first time when I was 10, and from the age of 10 to 12, I think it's the only book I read. That's probably an exaggeration, because I had to read books for school, and I probably read like little novels, little chapter books or something. But I read that book over and over and over. I would read it, and then when it was finished, I would go back and read it again, and then it would be finished, and I would go back and read it again. And I just did that for 2 years straight until I felt like I could read the Silmarillion. So I had tried after I read The Lord of the Rings to read the Silmarillion, and it was a bit over my head. I found it a bit dry at that time. So until I was ready to fully read that all the way through, I just read Lord of the Rings on repeat. The next question, and I really don't know if I'm saying your name right or not, even though I talk to you all the time on BookTube, is from Yolian or Jolene. I'm not really sure. Please phonetically spell it out for me so I can make sure to say it right in the future. Was what author have you read the most books from, and is this your favorite author? If not, who is your favorite author? So the 3 authors that I have read the most books from, this is one that I actually did prepare for, because when she sent the question, I was like, I need to actually count these and see. So the author that I have read the most books from is Stephen King, but he has a lot of books to choose from. So I think I had read 30 something of his like 70 something books. And Stephen King is my favorite author. So yes, the person I have read the most books from is in fact my favorite author. The other two authors I have read the most from are Terry Brooks. So I remember counting this up and I believe it was like 25. I think I have read 25 of his books before I eventually gave up and like threw in the towel on the world of Shannara. And the other person that I have read the most books from, if you count graphic novels as well, is Neil Gaiman, who is another one of my favorite authors, and I love all of the things that he creates. So Terry Brooks I would not count amongst my favorite authors, though I do have some childhood nostalgia for his works. But I have read a lot of his books, I've read a lot of Stephen King's books, and I've read a lot of Neil Gaiman's books. The next question is from Nadia R, and it says, what book do you relate to the most and why? So, I don't know. It's hard to, when you read a lot of fantasy, it's hard to relate to the characters if you have a life that is as boring as mine. But a book that I did find that I related to some of the aspects of the book was the Book of the Ancestor series by Mark Lawrence. And the reason I'm going to say this is because there were a lot of really solid, wonderful, profound female friendships in that book, which is not something that I see a lot in fantasy or in literature in general. I think there's a societal view that girls can't be good friends to each other, or, you know, we're too catty or too petty to form these kind of lasting bonds, and that jealousy or whatever gets in the way. But I have a group of the best friends that I could ever hope to have, who are the best group of women, I guess now, because we're all grown up, that I could hope to have. We are, you know, we try to support each other. We are there for each other when things are good, when things are bad. I know that I can always count on them. I count myself very fortunate to have the friends that I do. And while I have lots of friends that are boys or men as well, I think that female friendship is something that often gets overlooked, and that's something that I really identified with in this book. The next question is from Joanna, and it says, I would love to know what your spouse, family, and loved ones think about your BookTube channel, and I would also love to know how you and your spouse met, if you have time to answer. So my family has always been very supportive of whatever I choose to do. My parents definitely watch my videos, even though they don't. Well, my dad knows about some of the books that I'm talking about, but he has read much more classic fantasy than modern fantasy. But they do watch them. They are very supportive. They're very happy. They were all very excited when I hit 500 subscribers. My husband watches all of my videos, despite the fact that he is usually in the next room over and can hear me record them all. So I'm really appreciative of that as well. And how I met my husband is pretty much the nerdiest story that you can get. I took organic chemistry as an elective. So I was an art student, like I said, but I thought organic chemistry would be helpful if I did want to apply to med school. And also I had a really annoying habit when I was younger of needing to challenge myself and feel like I could succeed at whatever I wanted to. And so I felt like the hardest possible course that I could think of taking was organic chemistry. And so I took it. I have gotten over that, thankfully, as I have aged. But I took organic chemistry, and as fate may have it, I suppose, my husband was also in that organic chemistry class. We were lab partners, and we had completely opposite personalities. So I was like Hermione on steroids, basically, just needed to have everything done, everything perfect, visited the professor's office at all the office hours, did all of the extra material in the back of the book, like whatever you could think of, I had done it. And he was the most laid back person. He would be doing things and I would be saying, Andrew, like, do you know what time it is? Do you don't have, like, this is not done yet. You're only on step 2 and we're supposed to be on step 6. Sorry, my dog is barking again. And he would just be so nonchalant, and it would all get done by the end, and we would both have the experiment finished, but one of us would be significantly more stressed at the end. I feel like we have personalities that have complemented each other very well in marriage and in terms of parenting. And though we have very different underlying personalities, we share a lot of the same core values, which is what I think is important. So that is how we met, and it is all kind of history from there. So So the last question is from Missy, and it says, do you listen to music while you read? And if so, what do you listen to? I do not. I like it to be absolutely silent. When I read or when I study or when I do work, I get distracted very easily, and I do not like to have any background noise. My husband is also the opposite in this way, so we have very different styles for most of the things that we do. I can, if I'm really in the zone, I can kind of block everything out and I get to the point where I don't hear anything. So kids can be fighting, people can be doing things, and I'm just reading and I'm kind of very focused. But for the most part, especially if I'm just opening a book to get started, I would prefer absolute silence to anything else. And those are all of the questions. So once again, I thank you for having asked them. I am so appreciative, like I said, of everybody who takes time to watch these videos, and I hope you have a great day, and I will see you with another video soon. Bye. So I realized when I was going through to put in all these names that I did miss a couple of questions, so I really apologize for that, but I will either answer them in a future video or save them for the next time I do something like this. But I have all the names typed in, and I'm going to attempt to spin this and hope that it gives me back a name. There we go. So Jitesh Yadav, you are the winner, and I will reach out to find a way to ship you a book of your choice. Thanks, everybody.